All right. Greetings, IEI family, IEI superintendents. Hope you all are having a good week. We're here for another of our UnWorkshops. This one is on cybersecurity. I've got with me, first I'm going to introduce our partners at TelAdvance, Jeffrey Johnston and Tricia Shevlin. How are you guys?
Wonderful. How are you?
Good. Good to see you. IEI folks, you'll remember Jeffrey. You probably he introduced himself as JJ. He was there with Joe from TelAdvance at our Palm Springs Summit. And they've brought two guests here to talk to us about some of the cybersecurity issues that you all are facing in districts. I've got Dominique Singer, who is Vice President of Cybersecurity with Telarus. And I've got Taylor Hersom, who's a VP of Cybersecurity your firm is?
Cyber
Compass. Thank you. Okay. I wrote VP of Cybersecurity at Cybersecurity. So at Cyber
No
Compass.
worries.
Good. Thank you guys for being here. We've had some interesting chats. So our group is thinking through how to get back to school, how to get kids back on campus next fall. It's a daunting thing. Cybersecurity is something you have gone deep in your careers on this subject. Our members know enough to be dangerous about security, but I want to help them kind of think through some of the bigger picture stuff here. So let's start with, if you were to drop into a school district in America, maybe you can each respond to this. If you were dropped into a school district in America, what would you want them to make sure they're doing right now to protect the students that they're serving, and as well as protecting their data, their devices, their network?
Great question. So I think the very first thing I would be taking a look at is, how are they protecting the workstations that the students are using? Do they have a strategy around, the protection of those workstations? Are they providing those workstations to the students, whatever they are, whether they're tablets, whether they're laptops, whatever the case is? And then when those students are working at home or learning from home, I should say, how are they accessing the learning environment? And then when they access the learning environment, are they contained within that environment, or are they allowed to go beyond that environment? So really what I'm getting at is, what type of security do they have on that end device that the student is using? I think that's going to be one of the biggest concerns and things to think about as they're building together a strategy that I think Taylor will talk to you about what that looks like. But the whole idea here is that you start with the basics and then you work your way out. So, good security on that device, whether or not it's administered or delivered by the school, and then security around how that device is connecting into the learning environment. So there's a lot of pieces and parts in there, but those would be some of the questions I'd be thinking about. How are we securing those devices? How are we securing the connectivity and access into our learning environment?
For kids using their own devices, Dominic, is there a way for the district to enforce security on those devices?
It's a little bit tough, right? That's some tricky waters. We see it same with the corporate world, where they're just trying to struggle with this idea of bring your own device. So in there, probably the first approach is securing the learning environment. So, having more advanced protections around the learning environment, being able to detect when bad things may be coming in from that workstation, the home device that happens to be compromised. You want to be able to contain the malware or whatever it is that's coming into that learning environment. So the short answer is being able to protect the learning environment first and then working your way out in those situations.
Okay, great. Tyler, you want to add on there?
Yeah, I don't think Dominic said it extremely well. I think the only thing I would add to this is that right now, our strategy is always the KISS principle, keep it simple, superintendents. So we want to make sure that superintendents and just the education field in general is focusing first and foremost on protecting their environment right now. Now, normally we would advise that you go and you have a formal cybersecurity strategy, essentially a roadmap that you follow. But in the near term, we kind of all got hit and blindsided by this new pandemic, and therefore education above all else has to pivot exponentially. And so being able to just secure as Dominic said, securing the learning environment is pivotal. Now, to add to that, I would say that I think we can all agree that we've finally started to see the good in people. You've seen a lot of business professionals come out of the woodworks to be helping any way that they can. And that goes towards your vendors as well. So if you're using Zoom, for example, I encourage the superintendents to establish a strong relationship with their Zoom representatives, because they will do anything they can to help you to ensure you're protecting your students. And that's something that I think we can all agree is probably the best way that you can ensure that you are appropriately securing your environment as it relates to students.
So I want to ask about Zoom specifically in a second, but most, my guess is that most technology, most district tech plans and roadmaps were written with the understanding that most of the usage is going to be on site. Some kids may be, maybe secondary kids, high school kids would be accessing at home, but a lot of it is, there was certainly no plan for in most districts for elementary kids to be doing a ton of stuff on their own, especially the little ones. So, what do you think might be, now that most districts are starting to figure out plans for having some instruction happen offsite, even when we go back in the fall, just to keep social distancing, because there's a limited amount of physical space. So they've got to find ways to do instruction without having everybody in tight quarters. What do you think might be the things that they might need to revise about their cybersecurity roadmaps now that more and more of the usage, anywhere from 20 to 50%, may be happening outside of school buildings, outside of the internal network?
Yeah, go ahead, Taylor, if you, so you got some thoughts there.
Oh, yes. Okay. So what I would think, I think this actually pertains to even more than education, but education especially, is you're essentially having to transform your whole security framework, because now we are all going decentralized. We're all going remote. And unfortunately that incorporates different security implications. And so back to, there's a common term in the security field called zero trust. And that's something I'm a big fan of, but it's essentially just having, you're taking away the security framework of the traditional organization, that on-premise, like you talked about, Doug, and you're creating an entirely new framework where you're establishing, first and foremost, the incorporating identity and access management, understanding who exactly is accessing your resources, who's connecting to your applications, who's accessing your sensitive data, and taking all of these data points that we're collecting anyway to establish a trust score. And that's something that I see school districts that are going to be adopting a lot of. I've actually had a few conversations just in the last 2 weeks about zero trust, specifically in the higher education field. And I just see us pivoting more than anything. I think access management, above all else, is going to become so imperative for school districts in the 2020 fall season.
Absolutely. And I would take a little pivot off of that and go with sort of what I kind of see happening in the future is more important to think about. But really quickly, what I think is awesome about being able to have JJ or Trisha on the call here is that they're able to really understand that every school district has different motions that they've put in place, even before what we've got going on right now. So they have different levels of maturity around security. So they can bring in a whole different set of suppliers that can be very agnostic and really come in and figure out, where are you today? Where do you need to go? But to answer you directly, I think one of the things to really consider is privacy. And this is kind of what Taylor was talking about around access control. So, I talked earlier about, the device having protection and making sure that the connection coming into the environment is secure and clean, from that home network or home user. What we need to think about is that this looks like it might become a new normal, where we'll have some ways of students needing to work from home, and then some in the office or some in the schools. So if that's the case, we probably need to be thinking about, how are we going to check the students' health? And I know that may sound like a simple thing to do, but then now we're talking about strict patient data considerations that need to be taken in mind, right? So how are we going to protect that data? Who has access to that information? And how are we going to really understand what that means? Are we going to use IoT sensors? What's going to happen in there? So there's a lot to talk about how we're going to bring these new students into our environment, the students into our environment in the new world, right? So I think there's a lot to think about there around just patient data, privacy, and information.
So in other words, districts will now be held to the same kind of, I don't know anything about this, but HIPAA compliance and like the kind of stuff where medical records, the protection protocols around medical records, districts will now be held to that.
Exactly. I see that as
because of the digital transformation. Yeah.
That's an interesting set of questions that our members are going to want to ask back in the district office about, have we prepared for handling medical data en masse, since that may be part of the plan. That's a great one. You mentioned Zoom, Taylor. I don't know why Zoom is the one that everyone knows about. I've used it for a few years. I don't know why everyone just Zoom is like Kleenex for video conferencing. There are other options, just like there are other facial tissues. Zoom also, as I understand it, has a lot of vulnerabilities to hacking, and there have been lots of stories about Zoom meetings being hacked. And it's one thing if it's me and my college buddies, or the five of us here. But when you're talking about children, I think any parents, would be livid if, I know I would, if my kid's session was hacked by some bad guy. But what do districts need to be thinking about? And I want to point out too, some districts are so afraid of video conferencing being hacked that they're ordering their teachers not to do it. So do not do it. And right. So everything is being done asynchronously, like the way we're doing this asynchronous on Workshop. That's the way a lot of instruction's being delivered, and some districts are going to go with that to maintain safety. Others are saying, no, we have to have that human interaction between the kid and teacher, so we're requiring Zoom. Districts are all over the place on whether they should do video or not. So what can you share about video? What are the big picture questions that they should be asking of their teams as they make a decision about whether to require video or not?
Fantastic question. I'll take a stab at this, Dominic, and then pass the mic to you. I think that up until a week ago, we all kind of had to deal with these implications regarding Zoom and frankly, a few of the teleconferencing apps out there, in that there were security measures that were optional, but they were not enabled. And so you have all of these wonderful teachers that are just scrambling to get interactions with their students and stay engaged in this pandemic. And they didn't, they're not going to know what security measures Zoom has or doesn't have. And therefore, there were a lot of negative, incidents ranging from obviously Zoom bombing, as we call it. There, students seeing things that they'll never be able to unsee, and information that was being passed along that shouldn't have been passed along, and people just essentially taking advantage of the Zoom vulnerability beyond. So I think Zoom has done a good job of addressing a lot of those. So have the other vendors. A few vendors got off lucky because they were not in the limelight, and therefore they were able to address those security vulnerabilities without getting a lot of the negative press. Zoom has also made a lot of leaps and bounds into, I saw they made a purchase today, for example, of an encryption company so that they can further secure their Zoom connections, specifically for things like the education industry. But that being said, I think that it is very important to, at the very beginning, to figure out when the interaction and the Zoom conferencing makes sense and when it doesn't. I think everybody just assumed, well, we just need to jump on Zoom and always be on Zoom and always be doing teleconferencing with our students. And I don't think that that's the case. I think that school districts need to be very strategic about where they are using these technologies. And unfortunately, you're kind of forced to be a lot more creative than the average business, I would say. I think that engaging with your security team, and if you don't have a security team, reaching out to someone that I know I can speak for Dominic and myself, we'd be happy to help and advise on some things you can do to protect your students. That's something we're definitely passionate about. But making sure that the few applications you're using are being used strategically and that you are very confident that they are secure before you start using them.
Yeah, and I know we're a little tight on time, so I'll be kind of brief here. And I just want to really emphasize again with JJ and Trisha, they have a whole host of suppliers that can bring in all kinds of different options to really understand where their administration skills are today. But this is not very different than the problem in the business world. In the business world, the challenge has always been balancing usability and security, right? So it's always been a trade-off and always been a balancing act, and that takes good, keen insight. And to what Taylor's point was earlier, you have to have a program in place. And what we mean by a program is that we've got the right policies, the right processes, and the right technology in place, and the people that know how to administer that technology. So taking this a step further, if we assume Zoom or any sort of interactive platform is going to be used in the future, which I think is a fair assumption, right? That superintendents need to be thinking that is going to be part of the new way that they're going to teach students. And more to the point, I don't think, I've got a student at home. I don't think that the idea of static learning is where it's going to be at, right? They must have this ability to interact with their classmates, so on and so forth. So in that regard, to Taylor's point earlier, having your internal security team or your technical team really understand the tools that they have deployed, whether those are security tools, knowing how to administer those properly and do the fine tuning, or whether those are conferencing and interactive tools, knowing how to use those. Because you don't have to turn it off and just shut it off and that's the answer. That there were companies back in the day that said, the internet's a bad thing, we're just going to completely disconnect from it. And that's, that's not usable, that's not practical.
Right.
So it's all about just being informed about the tools that you're using.
something that's a little bit more basic, but that I think, you know, we should point out that there's probably most businesses these days have some sort of, they've got rules and a plan around password protecting stuff.
Mm.
And, you know, you can sort of tightly control that. You don't have as many sort of different systems maybe that people are going to. The nature of a school is that, you know, traditionally sort of, you know, teachers are able to do what they're going to do with their kids. There's some things that the district mandates or controls, but, you know, teachers have in many places a wide range of you know, space to do things, to use their own curriculum tools, whatever. That means that a lot of teachers freelance on the systems that they access. A lot of teachers go in and they create their own accounts on stuff. They give out usernames and passwords to a whole class. There's probably to try to coordinate all of that and put it into one single sign-on application is probably a ton of work and may or may not be worth the exercise. What are the things? What should districts be doing to tighten up, you know, situations where kids are accessing stuff with teachers using random, you know, usernames and passwords? Like, what are the most important things for them to seek to control and run through their single sign-on tool versus what are things that they can say, you know, that's not a security risk to kids. We can leave it alone and let Mrs. McGillicuddy, you know, use the you know, like literacy tool that she likes.
Take it away.
Oh, I was going to say, Taylor, I know you're a risk expert, so I kind of leave that one on you.
Okay, so the term that we call it, Doug, is shadow IT. So unfortunately, there are all these, whether you're a school district or you are a Fortune 500 company, there are always going to be employees that go out there and download the latest and greatest cloud app and sign up for 1 million accounts and share their passwords. And
Right.
it's a constant battle for us security professionals. So the number one thing I would say is just structuring your security environment so that it is very centralized in how that access is given out. You can actually set a lot of restrictions. And I don't mean restrictions that are going to create workflow issues for the teacher, but rather restrictions in how these apps are downloaded, how the passwords are shared and the accounts are created. You can actually create administrative accounts at the IT level and manage those strictly, and then have a formal process for teachers to go through in order to establish new technology. So you're not creating this culture where you're saying, we don't want new technology, stop downloading them. You're just saying, come to the security professional so we can help you incorporate this and work together.
So let's take, if I can, I'm going to throw a real world situation to you. The district has lots of great licenses to content that kids can access, but there's a really great video. We're doing mammals in 3rd grade. There's a really great video on leopards that is on National Geographic, and the district doesn't have a license to National Geographic. So I go on and oh, look at that, Nat Geo. They allow me to create a free teacher account. Enter your students' names into Nat Geo, and you can grant them access at home. Or what they do is they go, here, kids, they create a generic password, like the name of the school and the year. This is my account. Here's my email address, Mrs. McGillicuddy at whatever. Log in, go view the video. You know, talk to me about that scenario and what should district leaders be thinking about with that?
Well, I'd say that security professionals certainly don't want to block education on leopards. So we would definitely, I would say that we would, back to my original point, including the security or the IT team is a way for you to come up with a creative solution. We know that education has limited resources, limited budget. Sometimes you don't even have a security professional in-house, and you have to leverage your IT staff. In these situations, we understand you have to get crafty. And I think that as part of that decision, I think it just needs to be made at the IT level rather than at the teacher level. If they determine that National Geographic, she can put in her name, she or he, as Jane Doe, and create an account with a junk email, and there's no sensitive information being provided, and it's simply linking to YouTube, for example, something very simple like that. And I don't see the issue in going that route and kind of getting crafty with how you share that with your students.
In other words, there's a rule that says if it's not including this kind of personally identifiable information, then hands off, you're allowed to do it on your own. And then you can let the principal and assistant principals sort of work with their staffs to make sure that's implemented correctly. Exactly.
Yeah, there's so I always follow HIPAA for healthcare because it's got 18 different identifiers for what is considered private information. It goes beyond just health information. We've also got other regulations now that are directly related to privacy. So you'd be surprised at how little information a hacker needs to steal an identity or to maliciously take advantage of a person's personal information. And unfortunately, students is some of the most valuable out there, which we can always do a talk about in the future as to why that is. But I think it's just important for teachers to understand that there are these hoops that you have to jump through so that you're not jeopardizing the future of your students.
Okay.
Yeah, and Doug, let me take just a minute to tag on that with just a little bit of a different angle, tying back together what I was saying earlier and also what Taylor's been talking about. This problem of identity and access management is not an easy one to solve for, but there are many different ways to solve for it. And there's too many to get into it right here and now. But one simple thing to think about for our superintendents out there is, they should be asking, do our teachers have administrative access on the workstations? Will our students have administrative access with the credential that they have? Because what we are seeing, whether it's educational organizations, whether it's the business environment, credential misuse, abuse, and stealing is the most common way that attackers are getting into environments. So being able to manage those credentials, being able to manage the access those credentials have, and then being able to monitor the usage of those credentials is highly, highly important. Probably one of the most important things I think that organizations should think about.
Okay, great. All right, last thing, and then we'll let you guys go. But let's talk a little doomsday. What are some of the, I personally am very naive about cybersecurity, and I just assume that why would anybody want to hack into something with kids? Who wants to hurt kids? There are people out there who don't care about this stuff and want to hurt kids. What are the really, without being graphic, what are the kinds of things that that our members should be thinking about as worst case scenarios if they don't really invest time to look into this summer?
Well, Taylor, I'm sure you got some thoughts here, but I'm going to jump into it real quickly. Just in a quick nutshell, when I talked earlier about controlling access into the learning environment. If you own the devices that the students are using, controlling that access. One of the things that we've seen, and this is obviously more at the high school level, but students are very crafty and they are able to find their way around security controls. And one of the things that we have seen is that they use these things called DDoS, distributed denial of service attacks, when they aren't ready for, and we've just seen this happen commonly, whether it's middle school, high school. Believe it or not, middle schoolers are good at doing this. They aren't ready for a test, and they can go easily find the ways to use these type of attacks, and then they can launch these attacks against the testing site and show a screenshot and say, look, teacher, I wasn't ready for my test. And pardon me, that's not what they're going to say, because that's the truth.
Right.
They're going to say, look, the testing site wasn't ready for me. Look, here's a screenshot to show that.
Right.
So
right.
The point is, being able to control the access to where they go is really paramount. And there are ways to do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and to add to that, I just think, unfortunately, we are getting a big spotlight on kind of what the implications of having a lack of security are for our children now more than ever. So obviously everyone's seen the Zoom bombing, naked people showing themselves to underage students, showing very graphic images and things like that. I mean, a psychological factor is obviously factored into that, but going beyond that, traditionally what we have seen for decades now is identity theft is a huge deal, and it's actually a huge deal for underage children but it's predominantly been the family members that have been stealing, family or friends that have stolen identity and taken advantage of it. But we are actually at a tipping point now where that is no longer the case for the first time since identity theft has even been a talking point. And the reason is because you now have students that can go out, students and children in general that can go out and put more and more sensitive information on the web to get access to the latest farming simulator app or to the latest social media app. And unfortunately, their identities are being stolen without them even knowing. You can take, it's insane the things you can do when your identity is stolen, from buying cars to buying houses, taking out college loans. It's terrifying, and it's a Debbie Downer, I know, but Dominic and I see this every single day. And it's not fair it's one thing if you're an adult and you share your social security number and you should have known better, but kids don't understand this, and it's not fair to them that we subject them to a life of turmoil because of we didn't take the time to pick up a better security strategy.
Yep. Well, we're here to help our members think through this issue. We appreciate your expertise, and I do want to point out we did mention Zoom a few times. I don't know that there's a Consumer Reports in terms of benefits and around cybersecurity with Zoom and its competitors. I know RingCentral has a similar tool. There's GoToMeeting has become sort of old school. I don't know where we are with that, but it would be interesting to know if and we don't have to do this here, but maybe with the follow up, if there's a way to compare security features in these video tools, and also with some of the asynchronous video tools. Like I know, like in my home, my kid's using Flipgrid. Teacher puts so they're doing video, but it's you're just uploading a video essentially, and it's inside of their secure environment. You have to have access to their Google Classroom to get in there. So I'm wondering if there's a way to help our members kind of compare these tools and learn more about these other options that are out there and how their features are different or the same in terms of security.
There are, and I would say that the answer would be to go through Trisha or JJ, because they have access to a whole host of suppliers that really do some expert things around conferencing tools and collaboration tools.
Yeah,
I was just about to say, yeah,
great.
that's their strategy, or that's their specialty, is actually sifting through all of that to understand the prime contractors, the vendors that can provide a great quality service.
Great. So yeah, Trisha, JJ, maybe we can create a cheat sheet or something for our folks. All right. Well, thank you, TelAdvance, for bringing us all together. Thank you, Taylor and Dominic, for your time, and appreciate your work. And we'll put out a discussion item to the group over Thought Exchange, and then hope to get your thoughts on a short follow up. And I know we kind of went over here, but this is a really important issue. So I really appreciate your time. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it,
right.
Doug, and TelAdvance. Thank y'all.
Cheers.